So for this month, what we have been doing is every week we've taken a book and the title, some of the key nuggets, just ideas that I've been then taking into and laying it in the context of unity or a mystical, metaphysical message and how that can relate to all of us. And so today, the book that we're going to be looking at and taking a few things is called The Power of Now. But before we get into that, let's now do something together. How many of you know you have a power of imagination and that it's not simply kids' play? That imagination is a spiritual gift, it's spiritual vision, it's something that so often we let it atrophy, especially as we age. We underestimate and underutilize its power. We're going to call on the power of your imagination for a moment, just to go somewhere together, just to make a point to set us up for this talk. And so I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to close your eyes. And just as you close your eyes, take a good, nice breath and imagine that you could literally let everything go and become completely present. And just become present. Once upon a time, there was a land called paradise. You were born in paradise. Imagine being born in paradise. Everybody around you, everyone there celebrated your birth. They recognized you as a beautiful, perfect child of God. They recognized every child that was born and celebrated them as a beautiful, perfect child of God. And you can just feel the love and feel what that would feel like to be born into a time and a place and a world that recognized you and all children and all people, that all were loved unconditionally. They were nurtured and appreciated for the unique way. No one was expected to be the same. As a matter of fact, it was exciting to see how this next expression of pure God was coming to earth. What color would it be? How would it express itself? What gifts would it have? What talents? What point of view? Each and every one were cultivated and admired and honored for their uniqueness. Children and young people were supported in finding their gifts, developing talents and abilities. And everybody knew the reason they were doing this, because the purpose was to bring forth the presence of God, the presence of good that they carried within them, their very identity. That's the whole purpose of being there. Everybody knew that. And so they never grew out of it. Even the oldest in paradise was revered and recognized for a beautiful, wise one, expression of God. And so they studied, they learned, they explored, they traveled, they worked, they developed skills and abilities, they made a living, they got married, they had children. They encountered people who looked different, who spoke different languages, who approached life in a different way, but there was always a common understanding. No one ever even thought to question anything differently. Everyone that was there was a being of light, there to express and to be in service to their soul, their spirit. And that all you did was in service to your spirit. All that you ever became was an expression of your soul's potential. And so all of life was seen as an opportunity. Challenges, yes, they were challenges. Problems, yes, they were problems. And they were met in a way of knowing, oh, I'm facing this, to discover something new about how I can bring forth more God potential, more of my spiritual nature. And if they ever got a bit overwhelmed, they would simply whisper to one another, remember, just stay awake and remember. Stay awake and remember. What would that feel like? So when you're ready, just open your eyes and wiggle your fingers and your toes. What would life be like today if that were the reality we were born into? What if every living being just knew that they were here to remember, and that there was a part of them, something within them that knew that life was always carrying the greater life, what we call God. It was always carrying forth that within them, the fulfillment of that purpose and that potential. I hope you can feel it just a little bit of how freeing it feels, how liberating, how loving, how it literally would change everything. That differences then are no longer dangerous. Differences are opportunities to learn, to discover, to see, wow, how many unique ways can we express the one light, love, God here? How many of you would like to live in that place called paradise? People sometimes in their lives have experiences, breakthroughs. We have terms like they hit their bottom. We have terms like they got saved, they got woke, they got rattled awake. Something happened. Most of us have had moments in time when we connected with that part of ourselves that knows that there really is a deeper meaning to life, and that there really is a higher purpose and higher order of being, if you will. I do believe if you're here today and if you're listening, that you have tasted that possibility more than once, that you believe in it. Jesus referred to it when he said, as it is in heaven, as it is in paradise, so shall it be on earth when we remember. The Buddha taught when we all wake up, we'll be in paradise. Every great spiritual path, every really deep philosophy, every great spiritual teacher and enlightened master has pointed to that in some way. Now, the story that I just shared with you is a story that I just made up because it came to me after I began to really think about the book this week, The Power of Now. What is this book really seeking to convey? And at its essence, it is seeking to bring us back into the experience of remembering the true purpose for which we are here, the truth of our being, who we really are, and how you really, really can live in that world right here and right now, even though it feels like a very divisive, different world. That our reality can be present, expressing paradise, and yet also very aware and tending to the hurts and the injustices and the things that aren't working. Yes, they need our attention, but they need attention from people that can remember our connection and remember the reverence and why we are truly all here. So The Power of Now, the book was written by a man named Eckhart Tolle. The book he wrote it in the late 90s, but in 2008, by 2008, Oprah Winfrey had discovered it. And she said that Meg Ryan and somebody else had mentioned the book. So many people mentioned that she went out and got it, and it so changed her life. She tracked down the author, and they met and talked, and she again was just so amazed at how this was changing her life. In 2008, she created 10 podcasts that were all dedicated to this. And so within 1 year, this book had been then translated into over 50 languages. Now, how many of you could stop and name 50 languages? I honestly don't know if I could make some up, probably. Maybe they'd be close. But just think about that. This has now been translated into over 50 languages. And within the first year, over 35 million different viewers had watched those podcasts. That was just in 1 year. To me, that's incredibly exciting to know these ideas and that many people were drawn to this. It says there is something there. I think it is because people were drawn to his story. And so how it begins, he jumps right in and he says, "Until my 30th year, I lived in a state of almost continuous anxiety interspersed with periods of suicidal depression." Now, let me just tell you a little bit more about him. He was born in Germany. He was educated in England at the University of London and Cambridge. By 29 years old, Eckhart had become an eminent research scholar in comparative literature at the University of Cambridge in England. So he was very successful as a young man, and yet this is what he writes. "Until my 30th year, I lived in a state of almost continuous anxiety interspersed with periods of suicidal depression. It feels like now as if I'm talking about some past life or somebody else's life. But one night, not long after my 29th birthday, I woke up in the early hours with a feeling of absolute dread. I had woken up with such a feeling many times before, but this time it was more intense than it had ever been. The silence of the night, the vague outlines of the furniture in the dark room, the distant noise of passing trains, everything felt so alien, so hostile, so utterly meaningless that it created in me a deep loathing of the world. The most loathsome thing of all, however, was my own existence. Why carry on with this continuous struggle? I could feel that a deep longing for annihilation, for non-existence, was now becoming stronger than the instinctive desire to continue to live." In the midst of that night, he said out loud, "I cannot live with myself any longer." This was the thought that kept repeating itself in my head. And then suddenly I became aware of what a peculiar thought it was. Am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me. The I and the self that I cannot live with. Maybe, I thought, only one of them is real. It's very much like the scriptures when the writer said, the things that I would do, the things I know I should do, the things I want to do, I don't do because there's another part of me that keeps me from doing the very things that I should do, want to do. Why do I keep undermining my own best intentions? The realization that there's a battle, if you will, going on within ourselves, he was certainly not the first to uncover that. But that night, in that particular experience, what he goes on to write and talk about is what happened after that. Because something in him that night broke open. I cannot live with myself any longer, but who is I and who is this self? He had what we could call a transpersonal experience that literally shatters the illusion of self and that takes us back, that visualization I had you do in the beginning. What happens is when you totally surrender and let go of all that you are not, then the I am can come to the forefront. The part of you that remembers you're always connected. The part of you that knows you have gifts and talents and purpose and meaning that is intended to be used on this earth in this place right here and right now. That when we let go of all that we're really not, that we really are breaks through to the surface. For him, it broke through in such a powerful way. He woke up the next morning feeling a peace that he'd never felt in his whole life. And he thought, well, is it going to go away? Will this last? He went out and he began to walk around the park, and he would just spend days sitting on the park bench listening to birds and noticing things that he'd never really allowed to touch him before. And so this became his experience over time, and it led him to write the book that he wrote. Now that experience is very profound, but it's certainly not the only way it happens, and he's not the only one that has happened to. I could point you to the scriptures, to the apostle known as the Apostle Paul. How many of you know that Paul had another name before Paul? Saul. Saul was known as the great persecutor. Jesus and the followers of Jesus, he hated them, wanted to destroy them, believed everything they were doing was wrong. They were followers of the way. He was follower of Caesar, or of what he believed. And so Saul made it his mission to destroy them, when one day, traveling on a road, the scriptures say that he was blinded by a light, struck down off his horse, was so blinded by the light that he couldn't see for 3 days. He had to be carried into town. He had to find someone to pray over him. But what the story goes on to say is that when he finally woke up, he was Paul. He was not even the same man anymore. His whole mission changed. Now he was blinded by the light. He woke up. He could see the error of his way, and he made his whole life's mission about being a follower of the way, a follower of Jesus, if you will, which was the very thing he had been against. It didn't say he stopped and took classes for 17 years, that he went to every self-help and sought out every teacher. Now, he did study and learn, I'm sure he did. But the point I'm making is it can happen. I know people that have hit their bottom finally hard enough that something in them broke. I have a brother-in-law that was addicted to cocaine. He's a preacher's son, a Pentecostal preacher's son, and he was so just destroyed inside. He literally had to bar up the windows of his own home because he had become such an addict and owed so many people money. And something happened one night that he just woke up and remembered the truth. It can happen in profound ways. It usually happens in smaller ways if we pay attention. And so your ego is going to want to say, well, why hasn't that happened to me? Why? Lord knows I need to be slapped silly in the good way and just wake myself out of the mess I create sometimes. Let that go. Your way is your way. The point that I want to make is that some Christians have said this can't happen. I would say study the life of Paul and read the scriptures, and you will see that it happened in there all the time. So it can happen. It does happen. So to make it applicable to us, what is this thing that we're talking about, waking up? What keeps us kind of stuck in the trance? We did the visualization to begin with about what it is to live in paradise. Well, what is it when we forget or don't believe that any of that's true, and that we believe life is just dog eat dog? It was Lily Tomlin that said, if you believe life is dog eat dog, even if you come out on top, you're still on the top of a heap of dog eat dog. That's not the goal. So for us, what is it that keeps us in the trance? And then how do we begin to wake up? And what is it that is helping us along the way? So the first one, what keeps me from remembering? There is a part of us, and I say a part, its language is only that, ways of pointing to. So I don't mean a part of you like a chocolate chip and a chocolate cookie. There's not a little teeny piece of you. I mean, it is within your capability. It is within, just like a newborn baby has within it programmed pattern in the seed of its being. That baby has so much capability, so much that it is right there to express. We have within us what in unity we call the Christ. Don't get stuck on the term. Hinduism calls it the Atman. Interestingly, Eckhart does refer to it. He differentiates between Jesus and the Christ as we do in unity. The Christ is that the I am within us that remembers who we are and is always seeking to carry it forward in you. That is always seeking to carry it forward in you. And so when we say that what keeps me from remembering, the very first thing is not thinking that you can remember, believing that this is all there is. But how many of you know with everything in you that you have spiritual potential that has not yet been realized? Hasn't yet been fully actualized and expressed? Raise your hand. Do you really believe that? And do you believe that for every being on the form of the planet, no matter how they tend to show up? Absolutely, I believe it too, and I believe that that's why we are here. And so the first is to begin to ask ourselves, what keeps me from remembering that this here now, this is my paradise in the moment. I was sent. Jesus didn't say I was born. He said I was sent for this purpose. What if we would take that on to say, I was sent. You were sent, Deborah. You were sent. You were sent, Sarah. You were sent for a purpose. And that purpose is to express the one life as only you can, to show us what it can look like through you and as you, to celebrate that, to know that. And so what keeps us from that is the biggest thing is we tend to get lost in thought, lost in our story, lost in whatever. Many years ago, a teacher from the Himalayas came to the Americas. He was in the United States. He had been teaching a form of meditation and mindfulness. And as a driver was taking him from one place to the next, the meditation teacher had been here for about 4 weeks, and he said, so what are your observations? How are we different than people in where you live? How would you describe Americans? And the man very quickly said, lost in thought. Lost in thought. The teacher Tara Brock, who's a great meditation teacher, tells a story about one day she had been getting ready to teach a Sangha, teach that night. And so she was taking a shower to get ready when she noticed she was slathering shaving cream on her head instead of shampoo. She said, thank God I didn't just get the razor and just start, She said, I stopped and I was caught between a little bit of shame and thinking how funny that is, that here I am, a mindfulness teacher, lost in thought. We all do it. The point is to realize, yeah, you do it. And the moment you realize you've done it, guess what? You're now present. All you need to do is you realize it. You realize, oh my gosh, I am totally lost in thought at this moment. That we get so worn down, lost in thought, we can find ourselves literally very weary and needing respite, needing a way to be able to separate ourselves from the incessant thinking, the urges, the programming, all the stuff. Because we have that, but we're not that. We're so much more than that. There's a beautiful story that is told about a woman. She said, one afternoon, a tired-looking dog wandered into my yard and followed me through the door into the house. He went down the hall, found a rug in the sunlight, and slept there for an hour. Since my dogs didn't seem to mind his presence and he seemed like a good dog, I was okay with him, so I just let him be. And at the end of the hour, he went to the door and I let him out. But the next day, much to my surprise, he came back, went to the same rug, circled in the sun a few times, and a nap. I let him out. Continued for a few more days until finally I pinned a note on his collar. And I said, every afternoon your dog comes to my house for a nap. I don't mind, but I want to make sure it's okay with you. She said, sure enough, the dog came back the next day with a new note. And the note said, this is Cooper. He lives in a home with 3 children in it, 3 small children. He's trying to catch up on his sleep. May I come with him tomorrow? Many of us just need some sleep, some good respite. But we push ourselves to run on empty, to not get what we need, and get so identified with our thoughts and our beliefs and our differences. It's a tall order to be mindful It's a tall order to commit to prayer and meditation practices, becoming aware of where am I now? I have a practice I created years ago when someone introduced this to me, is that every time I walk through a doorway or touch a doorknob, I pause for a breath and where am I now? Because quite often, I'm about as far away from that place in my mind as I could be. Let's fess up. Since I've been talking, how many of you have drifted out of this building? I know. It's life. We do it. It is a practice to bring your awareness back. I mean, we even condition ourselves. There's certain people, when they start talking, we take pride in being able just to go to our happy place. Just smile. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Sometimes you need to for your self-preservation. And yet, are we as committed to cultivating mindfulness? What if we would do a little exercise every morning and let yourself be born into paradise? Be born a blessing. Be born with the capacity to behold every other person as a blessing. To remember and allow yourself to be born into a purpose. That whatever you're doing, however productive or non-productive you may choose to label it, whatever you're doing, can you do it in a way that is, I'm here for the purposes of my spirit. That's why I'm here. That's how we begin to wake up. So we begin asking ourselves, what keeps me from remembering? The second, then, is to really begin to cultivate that capacity to be present. In the scriptures, Jesus was a master at uses parables and teachings because it's like a Buddhist or a Zen koan. It doesn't give you the answer. It calls you into the question, to let the truth be revealed to you from within. He was always pointing people. He never said, I have to tell you your truth. He said, let me help you discover how you access your own truth in line to truth. There's a story that's recorded, I believe it's in the Gospel of Luke, but it's about two sisters, Mary and Martha. And in this story, Jesus was traveling through their town, and Mary and Martha were excited to be able, through reading the scriptures, we know that they seem to have known him and better than many. And so as he was traveling through, they invited them to come to their home. And as he arrived with some of the disciples, and Jesus is apparently sitting and he's just sharing, and there is Mary on the floor at his feet, just soaking it up. But Martha, who's more in charge of the house, is busy. The scripture said she was very busy. I mean, she had people to feed. She was entertaining. How many of you know that takes being busy? She was busy getting it done. And I can just imagine her, because I'm very much a Mary, let's get it done. And if my little sister, I'm a Martha, let's get it done. And if my little sister Mary were over there, I'd be like, get up off your pillow and come help me. Come on. And we know she must have tried some of that, because the scriptures literally say she eventually went to Jesus and said, Jesus, don't you care? Now here's this man, she's invited this holy man into her home, and now she's arguing with him. Don't you care that I'm doing all this stuff and my sister is doing nothing? And he looks at her and said, Martha, Martha, you are busy with many things, and only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen the better part. That's the end of the story. For a long time, I thought, well, I'm about as happy for Mary as I could possibly be, When I began to understand that the Bible, that the real power is that these characters represent characteristics of who we are. For years, I tried to think, well, what was the one thing, and which one was better, Mary or Martha? Consider this. I believe what Jesus was hoping we would eventually understand is you live so much in an either or. You're secular or you're spiritual. You're holy or you're unholy. You're good or you're bad. You're busy or you're lazy. You're doing what you need to be doing to pay the bills, or you're going to fill your cup to keep yourself sane. It's an either or. Mary does one and Martha does the other. I truly believe the reason he didn't dissolve it or resolve it is because we are meant to understand we have Mary energy. We have Martha energy. There is that within us which knows how to always be present, which knows what the most important thing is, which remembers that we are in paradise and to nurture that and drink it in. And we have the part of us that knows the baby needs to be fed, that knows the mortgage needs to be paid, that knows civil rights and equal rights and justice and goodness and integrity need to be advanced forward, that it's not an either or, it needs to be a both and. And can we find the space and be the place that are the leaders and are doing the things that need to be done, but not without the union of the Mary, Martha, Christ consciousness. Can you feel that? It's powerful when that all comes together. So to realize, Richard, would you give me that song? To create some awareness, to be able to say, where am I now? And how am I being called to stay present? And then there is the presence. The title of the book is The Power of Now, a guide to spiritual enlightenment. But one of the other big points he makes is that now is the only time we have, that time is a string of nows. All we can do is what we can do now. But the now is not simply a place in time. It is presence itself being engaged. That when we really begin to be still and know, when we learn to be here now and be present, we enter into a gateway of pure presence. A final story that I heard that just really to me makes this point so powerful. There was a woman who had just turned 40 years old, and all her life she'd wanted to be a nurse, an RN. And she had started to school when she was young, but then she got married and had children, and you know how that goes quite often. And so for years she had been present to that and was thankful to do it. And yet now on her 40th birthday, she realized there's nothing holding me back. It's time for me to go to school to become an RN. Now, going back to school full-time at 40 years old can be a little bit intimidating. It's natural to compare yourself. And she was no longer married. She didn't have a lot of support. And she said one of the biggest things that had happened over those 40 years is she had grown up in a kind of church where she was taught about God, but it never really resonated. And so she had just thrown out God with the bathwater along the way. So she said at 40 years old, she really didn't have a God connection, didn't have a lot of support, but she was determined, something in her wanted to become a nurse. So she set out, signed up, started taking the classes, was enrolled. But she found herself struggling, as would be normal, and just trying to stay on top of this right here. Trying to deal with the doubt, with the frustration, with all of that was becoming a full-time job. And she said one day a professor in one of the classes was talking, it was a psychology class, but he got a little off track because of a question that came up. And he turned to the chalkboard and he just drew a whole, just dots all over this big chalkboard. And he went and he found a cluster of dots and he circled a few of them. He said, what I just circled here, that's your experience, your knowledge, that's your consciousness, that's everything you know. He said, now look at this. There's a lot of other experiences, a lot that can be known, but this is yours. That's yours. And as time goes on, he began to widen it. He said, you'll learn some more things and you'll pick up some other things. He came over here and drew a circle. He said, and you're going to encounter some people, you wonder how you even on the same planet, your worlds are so different. Your dots, your experiences, what constitutes your consciousness, this is it. And it can grow and expand. And it can change. And one of the greatest things we can learn is that we all have bits and pieces, but no two are unique. But mine doesn't invalidate yours, and yours doesn't invalidate mine. I can't say that's not your reality and that that's not your feeling, because those are your dots. But then he asked them to look back, and he said, what else do you see? And someone finally said, the blackboard. He said, that's right. He said, what would you call the presence, that which holds all consciousness? What would you call that which holds it all? The mastermind? What would you call it? The universe? God? So the students began to say different things, what they would call it. And he said, no matter what you call it, do you understand that there is something, let's call it presence, he said. There is something that holds it all. And that each of us are just drawing our awareness from it. And he said, so the biggest question in your life becomes, how do you relate to that which holds it all for you? And she said she just began not only to cry, but to visibly shake. She said she had one of those moments where it just snapped into place for her that is God. That I am supported. I get so caught up in this. This is my reality. This is my experience. This is only as far as I can see. And that is true. And there's another truth. There is that which holds it all. Call it God, call it presence, call it life, call it whatever. But I hope you will call it home. And I hope that you will commune with it in such a way that you discover it is alive and well, and it is that. It is that which is always moving you forward in your remembrance. So let's close our eyes again. Right where I am, I couldn't be any closer. Right where I am, the presence of God is holding me. Right where I am. So once upon a time, there was a land called Paradise. And you were born. The people celebrated your birth and they recognized your beauty. They saw you as a perfect expression of the one life, sent to this place and this time with a unique spiritual DNA, with a unique soul calling. And you were honored for that. You were nurtured and taught and developed so that you could grow into that and thereby be nurtured by it from within. You were also taught to recognize all other beings, all creation, as just that as well and for that purpose. And it didn't mean that you necessarily resonated or enjoyed being around every single one of them, but you always knew. And you could always behold they were an expression of light. And so what if everything else dropped away and that is what you carried forward? What if everything else dropped away and this became the reason for your being? And what if you knew that as you were present and available, that there was something within you that always knew that always remembered that connection, and that would carry you forward in your purpose to express that? And you would say, I am that. I am that. I am here to be an expression as only I can be. I have access to all that my soul and my spirit needs. And there is that within me which is always guiding me forward, growing me forward. And that every opportunity, whether it appears bitter or sweet, every encounter, whether it appears holy or hostile, every new passage becomes a rite of passage into the greater discovery of who I am as this perfect expression of light. That's what it means to live in the power of the present moment, the power of your true presence, self, the power of now.